You think you can ignore my calls?
Grazie.
You cost me a lot of money today, Lydia. A lot of money.
The phone call came during the meeting. Dante Moretti let it ring through to voicemail without looking. His attention stayed fixed on the man across the table, whose hands trembled as he pushed the contract forward. Fear had a smell in rooms like this. Dante knew it well. He built his empire on it. The second call came 3 minutes later. Same number. He silenced it with a flick of his thumb, his expression never changing. Victor was mid-sentence discussing shipment routes and border contacts. The words were important. The calls could wait. The third call wasn't a call at all. It was Marco, his second in command, entering the private room without knocking. That alone told Dante something had shattered. Marco never interrupted. Not for business. Not for threats. Not for anything except catastrophe. Marco's face was ashen. His voice came out tight and controlled, but Dante heard the fracture beneath it. There's been an accident. It's Elena. The world didn't stop. Dante would remember that later in the worst moments. The world kept turning. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Victor kept breathing across the table. But something inside Dante's chest seized so violently he thought for one irrational second that he'd been shot. Where? His voice was a blade. St. Catherine's Hospital. She's in surgery. It was a head-on collision, boss. The other driver ran a red light. Witnesses say. Dante was already moving. The contract forgotten. The deal abandoned. Victor could live or die. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the 20-minute drive to the hospital that Dante made in 11 minutes. His knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind refusing to process the word surgery. Elena was careful. She drove carefully. She followed rules. That was who she was. Steady. Grounded. The opposite of everything in his world. She shouldn't have been in surgery. She should have been at home, safe behind the walls he'd built, surrounded by the security he'd paid for. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Dante hated it immediately. A nurse tried to intercept him at the surgical wing's entrance. He didn't slow down. Marco handled her. Someone else would handle the paperwork, the questions, the bureaucracy. Dante needed to see her. Needed confirmation that she was breathing, that her heart was beating, that this wasn't the nightmare it felt like. A doctor stopped him outside the operating room. Older man. Steady hands. He didn't flinch under Dante's stare. Mr. Moretti, your wife is stable, but the injuries are severe. We're doing everything we can. The next few hours are critical. Critical. Such a clinical word for the possibility that Elena might not wake up. That she might slip away while Dante stood uselessly in a hallway, surrounded by white walls and fluorescent lights, unable to threaten or negotiate or control a single thing. What are her chances? The doctor hesitated. That hesitation was an answer in itself. We won't know the full extent until we can run more tests. Right now, we're focused on stopping the internal bleeding and relieving pressure on her brain. She's a fighter, Mr. Moretti. But I won't lie to you. It's serious. Dante nodded once. The doctor returned to the operating room. Marco stood a few feet away, silent and vigilant. Two of Dante's men appeared at the end of the hallway, taking up positions. Security, protection, all the things Dante had built his life around. All utterly useless now. He pulled out his phone. The screen showed 2 missed calls from Elena, both from 40 minutes ago, and beneath them, a text notification. Also from Elena, also unread. The timestamp glared at him. Sent 38 minutes ago. Dante stared at that notification. His thumb hovered over it. Something cold and terrible spread through his chest because the timeline was forming in his head now, sharp and unforgiving. The first call during the meeting. The second call 3 minutes later. The text message sent between them. And then silence. Then Marco's entrance. The accident. She'd been trying to reach him. Right before it happened. Maybe even as it happened. He didn't open the message. Not yet. His hand lowered. The phone screen went dark. He couldn't explain why he didn't read it. Maybe because once he did, the moment would become real. The words would exist. And whatever she'd needed to tell him, whatever had been urgent enough for 2 calls and a text, he hadn't been there to receive it. The waiting room became his prison. Minutes stretched into hours. Dante sat in a chair that was too small, in a room that was too bright, surrounded by people whose tragedies didn't compare to his. A woman cried quietly in the corner. A man paced near the vending machines. Children slept across plastic chairs. Normal people. Civilians. Their emergencies were broken bones and routine surgeries. They didn't understand what it meant to build a fortress around someone you loved and still watch them bleed. What kind of love had it been, really, if he'd sent her calls to voicemail? The thought came unbidden, vicious. Dante pushed it away. There would be time for that later. For now, he needed her to survive. Everything else could be dealt with after. The guilt, the regret, the recognition that he'd failed at the one thing that mattered more than any deal or territory or display of power. If you've ever felt the weight of a message you didn't answer in time, I'd like to hear your story. Not for comparison. Just to know I'm not the only one sitting with this kind of regret. Elena hadn't always been part of his world. That was what Dante loved about her first. She existed outside the blood and the violence and the constant calculation of threat versus reward. She was a translator for a publishing house. She spent her days working with words, with stories, with things that had nothing to do with the empire Dante controlled. They'd met at a charity gala. One of those events Dante attended for appearance's sake, where legitimate businessmen rubbed shoulders with men like him and everyone pretended not to know the difference. Elena had been there as a +1 for her colleague. She wore a simple black dress. No jewelry. No pretension. She'd been standing near the hors d'oeuvres table, looking vaguely uncomfortable, when Dante approached. "You don't want to be here," he'd said. She'd glanced at him, startled, then smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who doesn't want to be here either." That had been the beginning. A conversation that stretched longer than either of them intended. She didn't know who he was. Didn't recognize his name or his reputation. For one evening, Dante was just a man in a well-tailored suit who made her laugh and listened when she talked about her work. It was the first honest conversation he'd had in years. He should have walked away. Should have recognized that bringing someone like Elena into his life was cruel. But he didn't. He pursued her. Carefully at first. Then with the same ruthless focus he applied to everything he wanted. And Elena, despite her intelligence and her instincts, let him in. Their courtship had been unconventional. Dante couldn't take her to normal places. Couldn't risk being seen in public more than necessary. So he brought her into his home instead. Cooked for her. Talked with her. Let her see pieces of himself he kept hidden from everyone else. And Elena somehow saw past the danger. Saw the man beneath the reputation. "I know what you are," she told him once. Months into their relationship, they'd been in his kitchen. Late night. Rain against the windows. "I'm not naive, Dante. I know your business isn't legal. I know there are things you do that I'll never understand." He tensed, waiting for the rejection. The fear. The disgust. Instead, she'd stepped closer. Placed her hand against his chest. "But I also know you're more than that. And I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm ignoring the rest. But because I'm choosing you anyway." That was Elena. She saw him. All of him. The violence and the tenderness. The ruthlessness and the vulnerability. And she stayed. They'd married quietly. No massive wedding. No spectacle. Just a small ceremony with Marco as witness and a judge who owed Dante a favor. Elena wore a white dress she'd bought herself. Dante wore the ring she'd chosen. And for a few hours, in that small room with sunlight streaming through the windows, they were just two people promising to love each other. Nothing more. Nothing less. The first year of marriage had been an adjustment. Elena kept her job. Kept her independence. Dante installed security measures she tolerated with patient amusement. She learned to live with his absences, his late nights, his sudden departures. He learned to come home to someone who asked about his day and meant it. Who cooked breakfast on Sundays and fell asleep reading on the couch. Who made the fortress he'd built feel like a home. But the balance was delicate. Dante's world was violent, unpredictable. He tried to keep it away from her, tried to maintain the separation between business and home. Most days it worked. Elena went to her office. Dante handled his territory. They met in the evenings and pretended the rest didn't exist. Except it always existed. The threats, the enemies, the knowledge that loving someone like Dante meant accepting a target on your back. Elena never complained, never asked him to change. But Dante saw the worry in her eyes when he came home late, saw the way she watched the news, looking for reports of violence in the city. She carried his secrets with grace, but they were still heavy. And Dante, in his arrogance, believed he could protect her, believed that his reputation and his resources and his carefully constructed empire were enough to keep her safe. He'd been wrong. You couldn't protect someone from a drunk driver running a red light. You couldn't negotiate with chance. And all the power Dante had accumulated meant nothing when Elena's car crumpled like paper and her body broke against metal and glass. The day of the accident had started like any other. Dante woke early. Elena was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. He'd watched her for a moment, allowing himself that small indulgence, before rising to start the day. Breakfast was silent. Elena was distracted, her attention on her phone. Dante assumed it was work. She'd been stressed lately about a project, a difficult translation. He hadn't asked for details, hadn't made time to listen. There was a meeting scheduled for late afternoon, a new shipment arriving at the docks. Marco had reported potential issues with one of their suppliers. Business as usual. "I might be late tonight," Elena had said as they cleared the dishes. Her voice was quiet, hesitant in a way that should have caught his attention. Dante glanced at her. "Work? No. Just something I need to take care of." He'd nodded, already mentally reviewing the day's agenda. "I'll probably be late too. There's a meeting with Victor. Might run long." Elena had smiled, small and sad and fleeting. "Okay." She'd kissed him before leaving, a longer kiss than usual. Her hand lingered against his cheek. Dante remembered thinking it was odd, but he'd dismissed it. Elena was affectionate. It was one of the things he loved about her. She reminded him he was human. If you've ever replayed a goodbye in your mind, searching for signs you missed, you understand what comes next. I'd give anything to go back to that kitchen, to ask her what was wrong, to really look at her. The meeting with Victor had been routine. A negotiation over territory, over percentages, over the logistics of moving product through the city without attracting attention. Dante had done it 1,000 times. The conversation required focus but not his full attention. His mind wandered occasionally to the evening, to whether he'd be home before midnight, to whether Elena would wait up for him. The first call came at 4:47. Dante saw her name on the screen. Let it ring through. Victor was talking, his voice droning on about schedules and payments. The call could wait. Elena knew how these meetings went. She wouldn't interrupt unless it was urgent. And if it was urgent, she'd call again. She did. 3 minutes later, Dante silenced it without looking. Irritation flickered through him. Not at her. At the interruption. At the distraction. He needed to focus. This deal was important. Elena would understand. The text came at 4:51. Dante felt the vibration against his thigh. Ignored it. Across the table, Victor was pushing papers forward, his hands shaking. Fear Dante recognized. The man was afraid. Good. Fear kept people honest. Then Marco entered, and the world fractured. Later, in the hospital hallway, Dante would reconstruct the timeline with brutal precision. Elena's first call at 4:47. Her second at 4:50. Her text at 4:51. The accident reported at 4:53. 2 minutes. She'd sent him a message, and 2 minutes later, her car had been hit by a truck running a red light at 60 miles per hour. Had she been texting while driving? No. Elena was careful. She wouldn't do that. She must have been stopped. At a light, maybe, or pulled over. She tried to call. Twice. And when he didn't answer, she'd sent the message instead. Whatever she needed to tell him, it had been important enough to pull over. Important enough to try 3 times. And he'd ignored all of it. The surgeon emerged at 9:37. 5 hours after the accident. 5 hours of Dante sitting in that waiting room, staring at his phone, at the unread message that felt like a live grenade in his hand. The surgeon looked tired. His scrubs were stained. He pulled his mask down as he approached, and Dante stood, his body moving on instinct while his mind braced for devastation. "She's stable," the surgeon said first. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. "The surgery went well. We stopped the bleeding and relieved the pressure on her brain. She's in critical condition, but her vitals are strong. She's a fighter, Mr. Moretti." Dante nodded. Words felt impossible. His throat was too tight. "She's not out of the woods yet," the surgeon continued. "The next 24 hours are crucial. We'll be monitoring her closely. Right now, she's unconscious. We've induced a medical coma to give her body time to heal. When we bring her out of it, we'll have a better sense of the extent of the damage." "Brain damage?" Dante forced the question out. The surgeon's expression was careful. "Possible. We won't know until she wakes up. But I'm cautiously optimistic. She's young, healthy. Her body responded well to the surgery." Cautiously optimistic. Another clinical phrase that meant nothing and everything. Elena might wake up whole, or she might wake up changed, or she might not wake up at all. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. "Can I see her?" The surgeon nodded. "Give us 30 minutes to get her settled in the ICU. Then yes. But Mr. Moretti." He paused. "She won't be able to hear you. She won't respond. I want you to be prepared for that." Dante nodded again. The surgeon left. Marco appeared at his elbow, silent and solid. Dante didn't look at him. Couldn't. If he saw sympathy in Marco's face, he might break. And breaking wasn't an option. Not here. Not now. His phone was still in his hand. The message still unread. The timestamp still glaring. 4:51. 7 minutes before his world ended. He opened it. The words appeared on the screen. Simple. Devastating. Exactly what he should have expected and somehow worse than anything he'd imagined. "I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I know you're busy. I know your world is complicated. I don't blame you for that. I just wanted you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. Even when you couldn't see me. Even when the business came first. You gave me 3 years of feeling safe. That's more than most people get. Thank you for that. I hope the meeting goes well. I hope you find what you're looking for. I'm sorry I couldn't be it. Take care of yourself, Dante. You deserve more than you think you do." The message ended there. No drama. No accusations. Just Elena, apologizing for not being enough. Thanking him. Loving him. Saying goodbye. Dante read it 3 times. Each time the words carved deeper. She thought she wasn't enough. She thought his world came first. She thought she was leaving. The timestamp, 4:51. The accident, 4:53. 2 minutes. She'd written this message thinking it was goodbye. And then 2 minutes later it had almost been. Had she been planning to leave him? Was that what this was? A goodbye before she disappeared? Or had something else happened? Something that made her think she needed to send this message. Right then, in that moment? Dante would never know. Not unless she woke up. Not unless she could explain. And even then, the damage was done. She'd felt invisible. Unseen. She'd spent their marriage believing she came second to his business. And Dante, in his arrogance, had never noticed. If your heart is breaking for someone who gave everything to someone who couldn't see it, you're not alone. This is the part where I realized I'd been blind. The ICU room was cold and sterile. Elena lay in the center of it, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and monitored every function of her body. Tubes ran from her arms. A ventilator breathed for her. Bandages covered the left side of her head. Her face was swollen and bruised. She looked small in the hospital bed. Fragile in a way Elena had never been fragile before. Dante stood in the doorway for a long time before he could make himself move forward. This wasn't his wife. His wife was strong and steady and whole. This broken body with machines keeping it alive was something else. Something his mind refused to fully accept. He sat in the chair beside the bed, took her hand. Her fingers were cold and limp. No response. No squeeze. Nothing. The doctor had warned him. She was in a coma. She couldn't hear him. But Dante spoke anyway. "I read your message." His voice was rough, unfamiliar to his own ears. "You were wrong, Elena. About all of it. You were never second. You were never not enough. I was a fool. I let you think the business mattered more. I let you feel invisible. And I don't know how to fix that now. I don't know if I'll get the chance." The machines beeped. The ventilator hissed. Elena didn't move. "You can't leave," Dante continued. "I won't allow it. You understand? You're going to wake up. You're going to get better. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you're the only thing that's ever mattered. The only thing I've ever actually wanted." His throat closed. The words stopped. He sat in silence, holding her hand, watching her breathe with mechanical assistance, and felt something inside him crack open. Grief. Raw and overwhelming. Not for her death because she wasn't dead, but for all the time he'd wasted, all the moments he'd missed, all the ways he'd failed her without even realizing it. The message played in his mind on repeat. "I'm sorry I wasn't enough." She'd apologized for not being enough, when the truth was Dante had never been enough for her, had never given her what she deserved, had built walls and fortresses and empires but forgotten that none of it meant anything if she felt unseen inside them. He stayed in that chair for hours. Marco brought coffee that Dante didn't drink. A nurse came to check Elena's vitals and left without comment. The night stretched on. Outside, the city continued its usual violence. Deals were made. Territories shifted. The empire Dante had built kept running without him. And for the first time in his life he didn't care. Let it burn. Let it all collapse. None of it mattered if Elena didn't wake up. Morning came gray and cold. The ICU buzzed with activity. Shift changes. New nurses. Doctors making rounds. Dante stayed in his chair, unwilling to leave, unable to rest. His phone vibrated periodically. Messages from Marco, from Victor, from others in his organization. He ignored all of it. The business could wait. The deals could wait. He wasn't leaving this room. Elena's condition remained stable. That was the word the doctors used. Stable. As if that meant anything. She was alive. She was breathing. But she wasn't awake. Wasn't conscious. The machines did their work, and Elena existed somewhere between life and death, unreachable. On the second day, Dante began to talk to her. Not about the accident. Not about the message. Just talk. He told her about the first time he'd seen her. About the way she'd smiled at him over cheap wine and mediocre hors d'oeuvres. He told her about the night he'd realized he loved her, watching her fall asleep on his couch with a book on her chest. He told her about every small moment he'd taken for granted. Every morning she'd made coffee. Every evening she'd waited up. Every time she'd kissed him goodbye and welcomed him home. "You made me human," he said on the third day. His voice was hoarse from talking. "I'd forgotten what that felt like. Before you, everything was business. Every person was a threat or an asset. Every decision was calculated. You changed that. You reminded me that there was something beyond power, beyond control. You reminded me what it felt like to care about someone more than I cared about winning." Elena didn't respond. The machines continued their steady rhythm. But Dante kept talking, because if there was any chance she could hear him, any possibility that his voice reached her wherever she was, he needed her to know. Needed her to understand that she'd never been invisible, that she'd always been seen. He'd just been too caught up in his own world to show her. On the fourth day, the doctor reduced Elena's sedation. The plan was to bring her out of the medical coma gradually, to see if she could breathe on her own, if her brain could wake up, if the damage was reversible. Dante sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, and watched for any sign, any flicker, any indication that she was still in there. Hours passed. Then, as evening light filtered through the window, Elena's fingers twitched. Just barely. So subtle Dante almost missed it. But he felt it. A small movement. Intentional or reflex, he didn't know. But it was something. It was her. That's it, he whispered. Come back to me, Elena. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Her eyelids fluttered. Stopped. Fluttered again. The ventilator tube was still in place, but her breathing seemed stronger. More independent. The doctor had said it might take time. That waking from a coma wasn't like waking from sleep. It was gradual. Confusing. Sometimes frightening. Dante didn't care how long it took. He'd wait. He'd sit in this chair for days, weeks, months if necessary. He'd wait until she opened her eyes. Until she could see him seeing her. Until he could tell her, with words and actions and every minute of every day for the rest of their lives, that she was enough. That she'd always been enough. That he'd been the one who wasn't. On the 5th day, Elena woke up. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden gasp or eyes flying open. Just a slow, gradual return to consciousness. Her eyes opened halfway. Confused. Unfocused. She tried to move and winced. Tried to speak around the ventilator tube and couldn't. Panic flickered across her face. Dante was on his feet immediately, leaning over the bed, his hand on her cheek. You're okay. You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're okay. I'm right here. I'm not leaving. She blinked at him. Recognition was slow to come. When it did, tears filled her eyes. The doctors removed the ventilator an hour later. Elena's breathing was weak but steady. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Dante, I'm here. The message. Did you? I read it. And you were wrong about everything. He said it firmly, gently. You're not leaving me. You're never leaving me. And I'm going to prove to you, every single day, that you've always been enough. More than enough. You've always been everything. Elena closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I was scared. I thought. I know what you thought. And I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry, Elena. I should have seen it. Should have made sure you knew. But I'm here now. And I'm not making that mistake again. She was too weak to argue. Too exhausted to do more than squeeze his hand. But Dante felt the pressure. Felt her holding on. And he held on too with everything he had. Recovery was slow. Elena spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Physical therapy, cognitive tests, monitoring for complications. The doctors were pleased with her progress. The brain injury had been less severe than feared. There would be headaches, memory issues maybe, but overall Elena was healing. Dante never left her side. Marco managed the business. The empire continued without its head. And for the first time, Dante realized he didn't need to control everything. The world didn't stop because he stepped away. It adjusted, adapted, survived. When Elena was finally discharged, Dante brought her home to a house that felt different, quieter. He'd cleared his schedule, delegated responsibilities, made it clear to everyone in his organization that his priorities had shifted. The business would always be there. The power would always exist. But Elena came first, not because she demanded it, but because Dante had finally learned what mattered. They sat together on the couch one evening, weeks after the accident. Elena was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. The television played something neither of them watched. It was peaceful, normal, the kind of moment Dante had taken for granted before. Tell me what happened that day, he said quietly. Before the accident. Why did you send that message? Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Sad. I'd been feeling lost for a while, like I was fading. You were always busy, always focused on something else. And I knew that was your world. I understood it. But I started to wonder if there was space for me in it. If I was just an accessory. Something you came home to but didn't really need. Dante's chest tightened. Elena, let me finish. She looked up at him. Her eyes were clear, honest. I'd been thinking about leaving, not because I stopped loving you, but because I thought maybe you'd be better off without me. Without the complication of a wife who didn't fit into your life. That day I'd made a decision. I was going to stay. I was going to try harder. But I wanted you to know how I felt. In case something happened. In case I never got the chance to say it. And then you called me. Twice. And I didn't answer. And then I got hit by a truck. She smiled faintly. The universe has a sense of humor. I'm glad you stayed. Dante's voice was rough. I'm glad you didn't leave. Because losing you, Elena, would have destroyed me. Not the business. Not the empire. You're the only thing I've ever cared about that couldn't be replaced or rebuilt. And I'm sorry I made you doubt that. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you called. I'm sorry for every moment you felt invisible. Elena reached up, touching his face. You're here now. I'm here now, he agreed. And I'm not going anywhere. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who'd almost lost each other, holding on in the quiet of their home. Outside, the city continued its chaos. Deals were made. Threats were issued. Power shifted hands. But inside these walls, Dante and Elena existed in a space that was theirs alone. Safe. Seen. Enough. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that the people we love deserve our full attention, I hope you'll consider staying. Not for me, but because maybe you understand what it means to fight for the people who matter. And maybe that's a fight we're all still learning to win. Months later, Dante would look back on the accident as the moment everything changed. Not because Elena had almost died, but because he'd almost lost her without ever knowing what she needed. The message, with its timestamp of 4:51, remained saved on his phone. He never deleted it. It served as a reminder, a warning, promise to do better. Elena thrived. The physical scars faded. The emotional ones took longer, but they healed too. She returned to work, to her translations and her books and her normal life. Dante adjusted his schedule, made time, came home earlier, listened more, asked questions, showed up in the small ways that mattered. Their marriage, which had been good before, became something deeper, built not just on love, but on intentionality, on choice, on the recognition that relationships required more than just existing in the same space. They required attention, presence, the willingness to see the person you loved, even when the world demanded your focus elsewhere. One evening, a year after the accident, Elena found Dante on the balcony. He was staring out at the city, lost in thought. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How close I came to losing you. How easily it could have gone differently." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But it didn't. I'm here. You're here. We're okay. Because you're a fighter. Because we're both fighters." She moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "And because you learned to fight for us instead of just for your empire." Dante looked down at her, at the woman who'd crashed into his life and changed everything, who'd survived a literal crash and come back stronger, who'd forgiven him for being blind when she needed to be seen. "I love you," he said. Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything he couldn't articulate. All the regret and gratitude and fierce, protective devotion he felt every time he looked at her. Elena smiled. "I know. I love you too." They stood together in the darkness, watching the city lights flicker below. Two people who'd found each other despite the odds, who'd almost lost each other to silence and circumstance, who'd chosen, in the end, to stay, to fight, to build something that mattered more than power or safety or any of the things Dante had once believed were essential. The message was still on his phone. The timestamp still read 4:51. But now, when Dante looked at it, he didn't see failure. He saw a second chance. A reminder that love required more than protection. It required presence, tension, the willingness to put down the walls and let someone in, fully and completely. He'd been given that chance. Not everyone got one. And Dante, who'd built an empire on taking what he wanted and destroying what threatened him, understood now that the most important thing he'd ever done was choose Elena. Every day, in every moment, with all the intentionality and focus he'd once reserved for business. She was enough. She'd always been enough. And Dante spent the rest of his life making sure she never doubted it again.